With how many reworks and visual gameplay updates there have been, many champions nowadays are nothing like what they used to be. And though objectively most of them are in a healthier spot than before, it's oddly nostalgic looking back at their older versions. The Rework Retrospective series is among my favorites to work on since I get to pay homage to a champion's janky, degenerate, and/or broken past. I thought it would be interesting to make a video going through some of the most memorable abilities in the game that no longer exist. Apparently many of you guys also enjoy history topics, seeing as how my videos on toxic metas, failed reworks, and removed items have performed pretty well. So how about we take another trip down memory lane and look through some removed abilities, what was wrong with them, and why they didn't carry over post-rework. Unsurprisingly, there's a ton of stupid, broken, and janky abilities, so I can't go through all of them in one video, but if this one gets a lot of support and feedback, aka likes and comments, I'll definitely make a part 2. Let's get started. One of my favorite, or should I say least favorite old abilities would have to go to Fiora's Blade Waltz. You guys know Fizz, right? How annoying his playful trickster is for being a dash that makes him untargetable that also does a crap ton of damage. Imagine if you had that on a point and click ability with an insanely high AD ratio. That was Fiora's old ultimate. Deciding which version is more annoying to deal with might very well be impossible because on one hand, Grand Challenge opens up 4 vitals for massive percent health true damage, but on the other hand, god, this ability was so stupid. Basically on cast, Fiora becomes untargetable for the duration of this ability and randomly damages an enemy champion 5 times, applying on-hit effects with every strike. If there's only one enemy champion, all 5 attacks will hit that one person, totaling over 1000 base damage and 234% bonus AD at rank 3 during its final iteration, while applying on-hit effects. This was a stat check ability to end all stat check abilities. During the early game, it wouldn't matter all that much, but old Fiora was laughably weak during the early game overall. Towards the late game, especially after you got some items, Blade Waltz could be equated to Master Yi's Alpha Strike on steroids. The sheer amount of damage this attack could deal, especially to a single target mate fighting her, almost impossible unless you were a full armor tank. If she got her hands on the enemy AD carry or mage, zero counterplay, like actually zero counterplay. That was the obvious issue with this ability. It took zero effort or skill expression on part of the Fiora player. You just press the button and let the champ do his thing. On part of the enemy team, there was very little they could do as well, either itemize full tank against her or mages had to run Zhonya's. Bear in mind, stopwatch was not an item back then. To stasis, you had to complete the full item. It was one of the most toxic damaging ultimates in the game. And I kinda missed it, to be honest. A full build Fiora one-shotting everyone with ultimate was one of the most satisfying if not unhinged experiences you could ever have. Grand Challenge is of course the better designed of the two despite its own problems. The payoff is a bit too generous in my opinion, but it's not guaranteed payoff, which is the important part. Moving on, next ability I want to talk about is Bloodwell, Aatrox's old passive. It went through several iterations, and the aspect in question actually was available post-VGU, but ultimately they took it out of his moveset entirely. There were 2 components to this attack. While dealing damage with his abilities, he would fill up his Bloodwell, and if it maxed out, for 4 seconds you would gain an increase of 25% base attack damage and a large amount of attack speed. So long as you were attacking enemy champions or neutral monsters, you can maintain this buff indefinitely, kind of like how Olaf and Swain's current ultimates work. Every so often though, on a long cooldown mind you, if he died while the buff was active, he effectively had a built-in Guardian Angel for a passive. After his mini rework, he would have to be in hellbent state to get this, but before, it was just active at all times. Like Fiora, Aatrox was just a bad champion in general, so a broken passive like this wasn't enough of an incentive to play him, but it was an iconic passive, one that I miss, as Aatrox was the first ever champion I one-tricked and the one who got me into League in the first place. Unlike Blade Waltz however, Bloodwell's passive didn't really cause any trouble, not until his rework. When casting World Ender, Aatrox would generate Bloodwell over the duration of his ultimate, up to 50% of his max health at cap. If he died at any point during said ultimate, he would enter stasis and be able to move but not attack, before restoring health equal to however much Bloodwell was amassed. What made this version of his revive more of an issue was that, compared to the previous iterations where Aatrox would either respawn and then be useless and die again immediately, or he would have to premeditatively activate Hellbent, this version of Aatrox could simply just press R when he was attacked and he would revive. Eventually, they made it so you had to score a takedown to activate the GA passive, but having that kind of ability for a passive was overpowered. Not necessarily due to the healing, but the ability to stall for time was invaluable, particularly in pro play, so they axed the entire thing altogether. I'm still a proponent of bringing back old Aatrox and releasing current Aatrox as a different champion, but that's a different topic altogether. It was a nice passive to have though, good times. You knew this was gonna be here. It's not an old ability per se, as it was only just taken out earlier this year, but Aurelion Sol's passive. If there was ever a more tragic ability in the game, it would be this one. Where to begin? On paper, I like it. Persistent damage that exists in its own medium is something you don't see all too often, if at all. Even for summons or constructs like Alawi's Tentacles or Heimerdinger's turrets, you either had to place them down or forcibly activate them to deal damage. Asol just had to stand close to you and you could take damage. Individually, the stars weren't that big of a threat, but when expanded via his ult W and after building some ability power, Asol could single-handedly melt entire teams, by far one of the most dangerous battle mages to have as an opponent. So what was the issue? For those who haven't watched my Why No One Plays episode or rework retrospective on him, in short, two things made Center of the Universe not as good as it sounded. One, there was a minimum range. While he could expand and retract his stars, they would always remain at an orbit of 325 units around him. Any champion who was within that radius could practically take 0 damage. He was the only champion in the game with a melee dead zone, becoming quite literally useless barring his ultimate. 2, landing the stars consistently proved to be too much of a hassle. Champions with dashes could bypass the line of fire and go straight for him, which only got worse as more and more champions came out with mobility. Asol's best matchups were melee champions with no mobility, or at the very least, any champion without dashes. He typically had above average tempo, so he could permakite juggernauts or mages. Assassins, divers, and skirmishers were, on the other hand, far more cumbersome to go up against. Sadly for him, those 3 classes are the most popular in the game. The champion design team chalked up Center of the Universe as a good concept, but was circumstantially too impractical to be useful. It was a good ability in what it did, but the landscape of League was evolving in a way that wasn't favorable for the Space Dragon, hence why they replaced it with Breath of Light instead. Not as creative of a damage source, but way more pragmatic. After all, it doesn't matter how fancy or quirky a champion is if no one plays them. Continuing on, let's talk about a very unconventional ability, Gangplank. Old Gangplank was a funny one. I don't think anyone's going to remember this, as the one I was referring to was way back in the early days of version 1. Raise Morale. At a glance, it's a simple ability. GP passively gained bonus attack damage and movement speed, and when activated, the bonuses would increase and he would share half of that to nearby friendlies. Very solid buff, all things considered. It would give a total of up to 120 bonus attack damage across all 5 members of his team. Doesn't sound like anything that would be cause for alarm, but would you believe me if I told you it had one of the most unusual activation costs in the entire game once upon a time? Prior to version 1.0.0.116, to activate Raise Morale, you had to make a sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? An ally minion. Yes, you had to kill one of your own minions, which meant not only did you get a long-lasting buff, but you would deny the enemy team a CS, including experience and gold. I wasn't around to try it for myself, I started playing in Season 5, but I'm assuming it didn't matter which minion it was, so you could kill every cannon minion and deny the enemy laner a bunch of gold and experience. Not sure to what extent this would influence the state of lane or gold discrepancy, but that sounds insanely hilarious to play a champion who could buff himself while cucking the enemy team. Naturally, this wasn't very well thought out. Being able to screw over the opposing team without any chance of counterplay from them doesn't make for a fun experience, as is the case for any ability that has a one-sided interaction. In actuality, this minion sacrifice cost would be even more detrimental in the present day, as a few years ago they made a change to where melee and ranged minions don't scale in gold. They stay at 21 and 14 or something along the lines of that. Instead, cannon minions now scale in gold. Around late game, they start to give 80 to 90, the equivalent of almost an entire wave of smaller minions. Granted, the repercussion is that you lose out on siege potential if you want to keep denying gold, but advanced players may be aware of the practice of intentionally withholding destruction of inhibs even if you have the means to, purely because super minions give the enemy team free gold and experience while you lose out on a lot as waves push more quickly. But anyways, in contrast to the previous 3, Raise Morale wasn't a broken ability or a design fail, just a niche if not degenerate gimmick that I found interesting. Next ability was a very unique but kind of awkward one. Quinn's tag team, her old ultimate. Before the Marksman update, or was it Assassin, I don't remember. Anyway, Quinn's old ultimate would have her bird Valor take her place as a mobile melee attacker. That's right, at one point Quinn used to be a transformer like Jace, Nidalee, and Elise. While out of combat, Valor would gain bonus movement speed like how Quinn does now and would have different abilities. Blinding Assault would blind all enemies around him instead of just his primary target. Heightened Senses would have Valor permanently gain the bonus attack speed buff from triggering Harrier for the duration. On the tooltip for Vault, it has an additional description for when tag team is active, but after reading it, I don't see how it's any different from the regular one. As you can tell by the tag team bonuses, they weren't as gameplay altering as the other ranged to melee transformers, which may likely be the reason they scrapped it. Quinn's present iteration is not much different from her previous ones, it's just they took away the tag team bonus and made her ultimate give the movement speed boost effect without changing the other attacks. So I guess depending on how you look at it, they phased out tag team for the simple reason of it not making any difference to her gameplay whether she was or wasn't Valor. If that's the case though, why did they see a need to have it removed? I feel like that transformation, be it functional or for vanity's sake, would have added more personality to an otherwise unpopular champion. Then again, I don't see why they took it out. They could have doubled down on the transformation fantasy and give Valor more engaging abilities. Tag Team is the only ability in this video that I can't come up with a good reason for why it had to be taken out. Sure, it doesn't look like it does anything, but so long as it didn't have a negative impact on our gameplay, they could have left it in there as just a small perk if nothing else. Or maybe there was a reason they had to take it out, I just can't remember. Any Quinn mains watching, if you can answer that for me, that would be very much appreciated. I think we have time for one more. Let's talk about Poppy's ultimate, Diplomatic Immunity. Oh boy, if we're talking about Degenerate, there is no better skill than this one. Very simple. After selecting an enemy champion, Poppy would become immune to all hostile interactions not originating from the champion in question, while dealing bonus damage to them for the duration. Those of you reading this for the first time, you may get the impression that it's not the worst thing out there. Tons of champions have ultimates or abilities that force two champions into single combat, Camille, Jarvan, Mordekaiser, Cassante. But there's one thing that makes Poppy's ult ultimate more terrifying than any of the others, one very key difference. Poppy could still damage everyone else while her ultimate was being used, or in other words, you could ult someone else on the enemy team like the top laner or support who isn't that big of a concern to you, and then chase after the AD carry or mage and beat their ass while they literally couldn't do a single thing to you. They couldn't damage you, they couldn't CC you, or anything. Poppy could ult the top or jungler who's engaging on your team, then run straight at you through the rest of your squad, and the only one who could stop her is too far away to realize what's happening. If you thought Olaf was the master of pick one enemy champion and run them down until they die, you, my friend, have never had to deal with the late game Poppy. Her Q was an overpowered version of Jax's W. Her W gave her bonus AD and armor and bonus movement speed. Her E was a dash knockback potential wall stun that Mordekaiser mains wish he could have, and her passive made her one of the best champions at withstanding burst damage. Stat check in every stretch of the imagination. I should make a Poppy rework retrospective. The difficulty, of course, was surviving long enough to reach that late game, and all things considered, Poppy was one of the weakest champions in the early and mid game. But if you pulled it off, you could make everyone pay for it in spades, a really troll experience. Singling out a target is perfectly acceptable in and of itself, lots of champions do it. But like I said with Gangplank and Fiora, having no form of counterplay separates a healthy ability from a toxic one. What makes Mordekaiser's Death Realm fair is he's a very slow champion and also isolates himself. It's just you and him, and once again you could always hide under a turret. Against old Poppy, not only were you cut off from the help of most of your teammates, but you straight up couldn't do anything to her if she ulted someone else except you. Or there was no one better to ultimate, then Poppy could just ult you, get the bonus damage, and insta-kill you. If it was just you and her zapped off into some alternate dimension to duke it out, then maybe it would have been more tolerable, but nope. In many instances, you just had to run, like that's all you could do. There was no way they could have made this ability balanced, so they didn't bother, and good on them for doing that. No one liked old Poppy. Alrighty, that's gonna be it for today. I know there's plenty more champions I can talk about with old abilities like Ryze, Rek'Sai, Sion, Talon, etc. So if you want me to make a part 2, then it would be awesome if you could give this video lots of support by leaving a like, commenting, and subscribing. Really appreciate it. As always, don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other history videos if you haven't yet, including the Rework Retrospective series. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.